When the studio doors opened that night, nobody expected an 86-year-old woman to bring Johnny Carson to his knees. But what she whispered into his microphone would stop The Tonight Show cold and reveal a secret that had haunted America's king of late night for 37 years. October 23, 1985. The cameras were rolling. Ed McMahon had just delivered his famous introduction. But something was wrong. Johnny Carson, the man who never showed fear, kept glancing toward the studio entrance like he was waiting for a ghost to walk through. What happened in the next 11 minutes has never been fully explained. Until now, I see messages all the time in the comment section that some of you didn't realize you didn't subscribe. So, if you could do me a favor and double check if you're a subscriber to this channel, that would be tremendously appreciated. It's simple, it's free, and it's something anybody who watches this show frequently can do to help us keep everything going and maintain the trajectory we're on. Please do double check if you've subscribed, and thank you so much because in a strange way, you are part of our history and you're on this journey with us. I appreciate you for that. Now, back to that October night when everything changed. The woman's name was Margaret Holloway, 86 years old, barely 5 feet tall, wearing a faded blue dress from 1952. She had traveled alone from Norfolk, Nebraska on a Greyhound bus. 3 days, 42 hours of travel, all to reach Johnny Carson. Security had tried to stop her at the gate. She had no ticket, no invitation, just a weathered photograph in her trembling hands and 7 words that made the guard freeze. Johnny needs to know what he did. The guard looked at the photograph. 3 young boys on a Nebraska farm. Summer, 1948. The tallest boy had Johnny Carson's unmistakable eyes, even at 13 years old. The guard made a call. Then another. Within minutes, Fred de Cordova, The Tonight Show's legendary producer, was standing in the lobby staring at this tiny elderly woman who refused to leave. "Ma'am, Mr. Carson can't see you without an appointment. We have security protocols." Margaret's voice was soft but steady. "Tell Johnny that Margaret Holloway is here. Tell him I was there the night his brother died. Tell him I know what really happened." Fred's face went pale. In 30 years of working with Johnny Carson, he had never heard anyone mention that night. Never. It was the one topic absolutely forbidden in Johnny's presence. But something about this woman's eyes, the certainty, the kindness, the weight of truth, made Fred do something he'd never done before. He picked up the phone and called Johnny's dressing room directly. "Johnny, there's an elderly woman here who says she knew your brother. She says she was there the night Richard died." The silence on the other end lasted so long Fred thought the line had disconnected. Then Johnny's voice came through, barely a whisper. "What's her name?" "Margaret Holloway." Another long silence. Then, "Send her to my dressing room. Now." And Fred, "Clear the hallway. Nobody sees this. Nobody knows." What Johnny Carson didn't know was that Margaret Holloway had been searching for him for 37 years. And what she carried in her worn leather purse would either destroy him or finally set him free. But first, we need to understand why the death of Richard Carson was the one story Johnny would never tell. June 15, 1948. Norfolk, Nebraska. The Carson family farm sat on 60 acres of endless wheat fields and brutal summer heat. Johnny Carson was 13 years old, skinny, bookish, desperate to escape to anywhere that wasn't Nebraska. His younger brother Richard was 8. Everyone called him Ricky. He followed Johnny everywhere, worshipped his older brother, wanted to be just like him. That night, a traveling carnival had set up on the edge of town. Johnny had promised to take Ricky. Their mother, Ruth Carson, had given him $2 and strict instructions: be home by 9 o'clock. "Watch your brother, Johnny. Don't let him out of your sight." Johnny said yes. But Johnny was 13, and there was a girl at the carnival. A girl with blonde hair and a smile that made him forget everything else, including his 8-year-old brother standing alone by the Ferris wheel. What happened next, Johnny never spoke about publicly. Not once in 40-plus years of television. Not to his wives, not to his closest friends, not even to Ed McMahon, who sat beside him for 30 years. The official story was simple: accidental drowning. Ricky had wandered to a nearby pond. Slipped, couldn't swim. By the time they found him, it was too late. But that wasn't the whole truth. And Margaret Holloway knew it. Now, 37 years later, she sat in Johnny Carson's dressing room. The king of late night stood in front of her, his famous composure completely shattered. His hands were shaking. His face had gone white. "How did you find me?" Johnny asked, his voice barely audible. Margaret reached into her purse and pulled out a small newspaper clipping. Yellow with age, crumbling at the edges. The headline read, "Local boy dies in tragic accident." "I was there that night, Johnny," Margaret said gently. "I was 17 years old, working the cotton candy stand at the carnival. I saw everything." Johnny's legs buckled. He sat down hard on the couch, his head in his hands. "Please," he whispered. "Please don't." "I'm not here to hurt you," Margaret interrupted. "I'm here because you've been carrying something that was never yours to carry. And it's time you knew the truth." Johnny looked up, tears streaming down his face. What truth? I let my brother die. I was supposed to watch him, and I... Stop. Margaret's voice was firm now. That's not what happened, Johnny. That's what you've told yourself for 37 years, but it's not the truth. She pulled out another photograph. This one showed Ricky Carson, smiling, standing with 3 older boys Johnny had never seen before. Your brother didn't drown because you weren't watching him, Margaret said. He drowned because 3 teenage boys from Omaha thought it would be funny to dare an 8-year-old to swim across a pond in the dark. They told him his big brother would be proud of him. They told him he was brave. Johnny's face crumpled. What? I saw them, Johnny. I saw them corner Ricky. I heard what they said. And when your brother jumped in that water to prove himself, those boys laughed. They thought he could swim. They didn't know. Margaret's voice cracked. By the time I realized what was happening and ran for help, it was too late. But I saw you, Johnny. I saw you running from that carnival, screaming your brother's name. I saw you dive into that water again and again, even after the police pulled you out. You didn't abandon him. You were desperate to save him. Johnny couldn't speak. 37 years of guilt, 37 years of believing he had killed his brother through negligence, 37 years of running from that night, all of it was crashing down around him. Why? He finally managed. Why didn't you tell anyone this before? Margaret's eyes filled with tears. I tried, Johnny. I told the police. I told your parents. But those 3 boys were sons of important men. Rich families from Omaha. The sheriff said there was no evidence. Said it would be my word against theirs. Your parents, she paused, choosing her words carefully. Your parents needed someone to blame. And you were there. You were the older brother. It was easier to blame you than to accept that bad things just happen sometimes. The Tonight Show was scheduled to start taping in 15 minutes. In the studio, 300 people were waiting. Ed McMahon was pacing nervously. The band was warming up. But none of that mattered because Johnny Carson was finally hearing the truth about the night that had defined his entire life. Those boys, Johnny said slowly. What happened to them? Margaret reached into her purse one more time. She pulled out 3 obituaries. The first one, Michael Patterson, died in a car accident in 1953. Drunk driving. The second, Thomas Wheaton, died of a heart attack in 1967. The third one, James Riley. She paused. He became a minister, and 3 months ago, on his deathbed, he confessed everything. He wrote letters to me, to your parents, to you. He wanted forgiveness for what he did, for what they all did. She handed Johnny a sealed envelope. His name was written on the front in shaky handwriting. That's James Riley's letter to you. I've been trying to find you for months to deliver it. Your people don't make it easy to reach you, Johnny. A weak smile crossed Johnny's face. No, I suppose they don't. He stared at the envelope, then at Margaret. Why now? Why come all this way now? Because I'm 86 years old, Margaret said simply. And I've watched you on television for 30 years. I've seen you make America laugh. I've seen you comfort grieving people and celebrate happy people and be the steadiest presence in this country's living rooms. And every single time I see you, I think about that 13-year-old boy who lost his brother and spent his whole life believing it was his fault. She reached out and took Johnny's hand. You deserve to know the truth. Not when you die, not when it's too late to matter. Now, while you can still feel the weight lift off your shoulders. There was a knock at the door. Fred's voice came through. Johnny, we need to start. The audience is. Tell them we're running late, Johnny called back. Tell them, his voice broke. Tell them I need a few more minutes. He looked at Margaret Holloway, this stranger who had carried his truth for 37 years, who had traveled 3 days to set him free. Thank you, he whispered. Thank you for finding me. But Margaret wasn't finished. What she said next would lead to the most extraordinary moment in Tonight Show history. Johnny, Margaret said quietly, there's one more thing. Something I need to ask you. Johnny wiped his eyes, trying to regain some composure. Anything. I want you to read that letter on the show tonight. Johnny's head snapped up. What? No, absolutely not. This is private. I can't. Yes, you can, Margaret interrupted gently. And you should. Because somewhere out there, right now, there's another 13-year-old carrying guilt that isn't theirs to carry. There's another person who spent their whole life running from something that was never their fault. She leaned forward, her 86-year-old eyes blazing with conviction. You've spent 30 years making people laugh, Johnny. That's a beautiful gift. But tonight, you can give them something even more powerful. You can show them that the burdens we carry aren't always ours. That forgiveness, real forgiveness, is possible, even after 37 years. Johnny stood up and paced the small dressing room. Every instinct screamed at him to refuse. He had built his entire career on control, on never revealing too much, on keeping the personal separate from the professional. But something in Margaret's words cracked through his defenses. He thought about all the interviews he'd done, all the celebrities sharing sanitized stories, all the careful image management. All the performance. When was the last time anything real had happened on that stage? Another knock at the door. Fred's voice was more urgent now. Johnny, the network is calling. We're 12 minutes behind schedule. Johnny walked to the door and opened it. Fred stood there, panic written across his face. Fred, change the format, Johnny said. Cancel the other guests. Tonight, it's just going to be me and this woman. We're going to talk. Really talk. Fred's mouth opened and closed like a fish. Johnny, we have commitments. We have. I don't care, Johnny said firmly. This is happening. Trust me. 20 minutes later, Johnny Carson walked onto the Tonight Show stage. The audience erupted in the usual applause. Ed McMahon delivered his introduction. The band played. Everything looked normal, except Johnny's eyes were red. His hands trembled slightly as he shuffled his note cards. And when he spoke, his voice carried a weight that made the entire studio fall silent. Good evening, everyone, Johnny said. Tonight, we're going to do something different. Something I've never done in 30 years of television. He paused, looking directly into the camera. Tonight, I'm going to tell you about the worst night of my life. And I'm going to introduce you to the woman who just told me the truth about that night. A truth I've waited 37 years to hear. The studio was absolutely quiet. 300 people held their breath. Ed McMahon sat frozen in his chair, completely blindsided. Her name is Margaret Holloway, Johnny continued. She's 86 years old. She traveled 3 days on a Greyhound bus to find me. And what she told me backstage changed everything I thought I knew about myself. He gestured toward the wings. Margaret, would you come out here, please? Margaret Holloway walked slowly onto the Tonight Show stage. The audience, confused but sensing something important, began to applaud. Johnny met her halfway, took her arm gently, and guided her to the guest chair. Margaret, Johnny said, his voice shaking, I'm going to read this letter now. The one you brought me. Is that okay? Margaret nodded, tears already streaming down her face. That's why I'm here, Johnny. Johnny opened the envelope with trembling fingers. The letter inside was 3 pages long, handwritten in barely legible script. He took a deep breath and began to read. Dear Johnny Carson, my name is James Riley. You don't know me, but I have carried the weight of knowing you for 53 years. For the next 18 minutes, Johnny Carson read James Riley's deathbed confession on live national television. He read about 3 teenage boys who thought they were just playing a prank. About an 8-year-old who wanted desperately to impress them. About a dare that went horribly wrong. He read about decades of guilt, of nightmares, of watching Johnny Carson become famous while knowing the terrible secret he carried. He read about James Riley's conversion to ministry, his attempts to atone, his final desperate need to tell the truth before he died. And he read James Riley's final paragraph. Johnny, I don't deserve your forgiveness. I don't expect it, but I need you to know that what happened to your brother was not your fault. It was ours, and if there is any justice in this universe, the guilt that has haunted me every day of my life will finally release you from the guilt that was never yours to carry. I am so sorry. I am so deeply, profoundly sorry. When Johnny finished reading, his face was wet with tears. The audience sat in complete silence. Some were crying openly, others sat stunned, processing what they had just witnessed. Johnny turned to Margaret. You carried this for 37 years. Someone had to, Margaret said simply. And I kept hoping one day I'd get the chance to tell you. Johnny stood up. He walked to where Margaret sat and did something he had never done on The Tonight Show. He knelt down beside her chair, took both her hands in his, and said, Thank you. Thank you for not giving up. Thank you for finding me. Thank you for giving me back my life. The audience erupted, not in applause, but in a standing ovation that went on for 3 full minutes. People weren't clapping for entertainment. They were witnessing something sacred. They were seeing a man released from a prison he'd been in for 37 years. But the most powerful moment was still coming. When the standing ovation finally subsided, Johnny helped Margaret to her feet. He kept her hand in his as he turned to face the audience. I need to tell you something, Johnny said, his voice steady now, clearer than it had been all night. For 30 years, I've sat behind that desk and made you laugh. That's been my job, that's been my purpose, and I've loved it. He paused, looking at the millions watching at home through the camera lens. But I've never told you why I needed to make you laugh so badly. I've never told you what I was running from every single night. Johnny's voice cracked slightly. When I was 13 years old, my 8-year-old brother drowned. And for 37 years, I believed it was my fault. I believed that if I had just paid attention, if I had just watched him like I was supposed to, he'd still be alive. The studio was absolutely silent except for the sound of people crying. That guilt shaped everything, Johnny continued. It's why I worked so hard. It's why I could never stop. It's why I've been married 4 times and failed at all of them, because I didn't believe I deserved to be happy. How could I be happy when Ricky never got the chance to grow up? He looked at Margaret. But this woman, this beautiful, persistent, courageous woman, traveled 3 days to tell me the truth. To give me something I didn't even know I needed. Freedom. Johnny turned back to the audience. How many of you are carrying something that isn't yours to carry? How many of you are punishing yourselves for something that wasn't your fault? How many of you have convinced yourselves that you don't deserve forgiveness? Hands began to rise throughout the studio. Slowly at first, then more and more. Within seconds, over half the audience had their hands in the air. Johnny nodded, tears streaming down his face. Me too. For 37 years, me too. Then Johnny did something that would become legendary in television history. He sat down right there on the stage floor, cross-legged, like a child. And he invited the audience to share their stories. We're not going to commercial, he said. We're not doing comedy bits. Tonight, we're just going to be real with each other. If you have a story about guilt you're carrying, about forgiveness you need, about truth you're hiding, I want to hear it. For the next 42 minutes, The Tonight Show became something it had never been before. A space for truth. A space for healing. A woman stood up and talked about the car accident that killed her sister 20 years ago. She had been driving. For 2 decades, she believed she was a murderer. Until the police report was unsealed last year and showed the other driver had run a red light. It wasn't her fault, but she had lived 20 years in a prison of her own making. A man shared about the business he destroyed trying to live up to his father's expectations. He had driven himself into bankruptcy and depression trying to be someone he could never be. Only after his father's death did he find a letter explaining that his father's hardest moments came from his own father's impossible expectations. 3 generations of men, all carrying the same wound. A young woman, barely 20, talked about being molested by a family member as a child. She had spent 15 years believing it was somehow her fault, that she had done something to deserve it. Only recently, through therapy, had she begun to understand that children are never responsible for the evil done to them. Story after story, truth after truth. The cameras kept rolling. The network executives called the control room in a panic, but Fred de Cordova refused to cut away. This was bigger than format. This was bigger than television. At 1:47 a.m., nearly 3 hours after the show was supposed to end, Johnny finally stood up. He helped Margaret to her feet. The audience, exhausted and emotionally spent, rose with them. I don't know what to say except thank you, Johnny said. Thank you, Margaret, for your courage. Thank you to everyone who shared tonight. Thank you to everyone watching at home who needed to hear that you're not alone. He looked directly into the camera one final time. Whatever you're carrying that isn't yours, put it down. Whatever guilt is destroying you, examine it. Ask yourself if it's really yours to carry. And if it isn't, let it go. Let it go the way Margaret just helped me let go. Johnny walked Margaret off the stage to a standing ovation that lasted 5 full minutes. When they reached the wings, Margaret stopped and turned to face him one more time. Johnny, she said quietly, Ricky would be so proud of the man you became. Johnny Carson, the man who never cried in public, broke down completely. He held this 86-year-old stranger while she patted his back and whispered, "It's okay now. It's finally okay." The episode aired at 11:30 p.m. that night. By morning, NBC's switchboards were overwhelmed. Over 100,000 calls in the first 6 hours. The story made the front page of every major newspaper in America. But more importantly, something shifted in the culture. Therapists reported unprecedented numbers of people seeking help. Support groups formed. People started talking about trauma and guilt and forgiveness in ways they never had before. Johnny kept in touch with Margaret for the remaining 3 years of her life. When she died peacefully in 1988 at age 89, Johnny delivered the eulogy. He called her, "the stranger who saved my life." In Johnny's final Tonight Show episode in 1992, he referenced that night one more time. People ask me about my favorite moments from 30 years of doing this show, Johnny said. They expect me to talk about the biggest celebrities or the funniest sketches. But my favorite moment was the night an 86-year-old woman traveled 3 days on a bus to tell me the truth. That night, television did what it's supposed to do. It connected us. It healed us. It reminded us that we're all carrying something, and we don't have to carry it alone. Margaret Holloway never sought fame or recognition. She simply wanted to free one 13-year-old boy from a prison he'd been in for 37 years. And in doing so, she freed millions of others. If this story moved you, subscribe to this channel. Share it with someone who might be carrying guilt that isn't theirs. And remember, the truth you need might be waiting for you. All you have to do is be brave enough to hear it. Where are you watching from tonight? Drop your location in the comments. And if you've ever been freed from guilt you were carrying, tell us your story. We're all in this together.